Welcome to the Mike Clegg YouTube podcast, and today I'm really pleased to welcome Liam Hennessy.
Thank you, Michael.
Well, I've known Liam Hennessy now for a fair few years, and Liam's got a vast amount of experience in sport. He's been a part of sport all his life, really, from starting as a young pole vaulter. He ended up going to many championships. He was the head of the Irish Rugby Union. He's worked at football with some teams such as Blackburn, Lazio, Bayern Munich even, and more recently he's got a fantastic university called Setanta University, which works out of Ireland and Thurles. And Liam, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Not at all. I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be with you.
Excellent. I mean, the stories you got to tell, and when I was on the course over in Thurles, it was amazing to be in your presence, really, to listen to all the experiences you've had, and you know, it's brilliant going through the list of everything you've done. But let's just take it back a little bit. As a young boy, you was born in Capel White in Tipperary. Is that right?
Yeah, Capel White is a small little spot. It's buried in Tipperary and it's steeped in the tradition of Gaelic games. Yeah, and I was born there. I was very lucky that, you know, we'd lots of open spaces, and as a young kid, like all my brothers and that, like everybody, we learned how to play hurling, which is our national game. Regardless of what people think, they might think it's rugby, football, Gaelic football. No, it's hurling. And the county I grew up in was it's called the home of hurling. It's where the GAA, which is the biggest participation sport, closely rivaled by football in Ireland, but it's where it was founded.
Excellent. And of course your history from Ireland and being a part of the GAA, and probably the sport, what you enjoy doing as a young boy, and it's a team sport, it's very social, but ultimately you found yourself going towards more athletics, and pole vault become your where you was an expert, where you become an actual athlete, are you?
Well, it wasn't that I was smart back then, but how many pole vaulters do you know?
I know that one Russian fella who kept breaking all the records.
Yeah.
I don't even know his name. Yes,
Sergei Bobka. Yeah. Well, no, I wasn't. I wasn't that bright as a young fella. But if you were to choose a sport in Ireland, it was the best sport to choose because nobody else pole vaulted. So if you wanted to do well in the sport, choose a sport where there's very few taking part, and you know, just practice and you could do something. So
but that's a wise thought, and maybe some young people out there, you know, they all want to become footballers. And I even say this to my son, you know, football, but the environment's very difficult. Why not choose a peripheral sport potentially? Why not go into a sport where maybe you might have an opportunity to be an international athlete? My two brothers did that, Mark and my brother Sean. They went to the Commonwealth Games, they went to the World Championships through doing Olympic lifting. So that's clever thought processing.
Yeah, well, for me, it would have been very unusual for a young Capel White boy who should have been playing hurling to start pole vaulting. But my father actually did pole vault as a kid himself, and I was fortunate enough that I went to a school, then a secondary school that had a pole, and when I found the pole and I started, you know, jumping, and then in around Capel White where I came from, I used to have a small pole, a wooden pole, and I used to jump over fences and ditches to get from A to B and across fields. So there was plenty of space. So that's what I did, and I combined it with hurling or anything that was active that would keep me outdoors. So that's where I started.
And that's brilliant. And obviously you've become successful. I think I was reading you on 55 international events you went to. And what was the highest you ever jumped?
5 meters, 509, 5 meters 09. So it's around the 16 and a bit. But the point in it as well for me was that I went to the States on a scholarship back in the 70s, and it was back then the only place to go for athletics to train or to become competitive. And I went there and I spent a couple of years there, but unfortunately coaching wasn't what I thought it would be. Okay. America is vast, and back then they relied more on natural talent, and I wouldn't have been very natural talent. A short guy like me, I was good off the top of the pole, which is more my gymnastic ability, but speed of takeoff was always an issue. So it kind of brought me into the world of sport, performance, science, and understanding how can you get to be better without resorting to drugs.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you're saying, and of course, to be natural is the best. And you went over to America, and you become an exercise physiologist. And was that a part of your time over in America, to be an athlete and also to study?
Well, I remember because one of the colleges I was in was down in New Mexico, and after completing a 6-mile run in the desert, now in fairness, you'll know that pole vaulters, they only have about 20 meters of a run up, carrying a pole. Now, a 6-mile run in the desert made no sense to me, but everybody on the track team, be they throwers, be they jumpers, hurdlers, distance, they all did the same base training, which was running distance. And to me, it was instinctively not what I needed. So there was one moment after that 6-mile run, I always remembered, I said, nah, there's got to be a different way of doing this. There has to be, because I'd been to France with a coach called Maurice Houvion, who was a renowned pole vault coach, and they were very technically minded. And that's when I was about 15 or 16, and now I'm 19 and I'm over in the States, and it's back to the old-fashioned ways of doing stuff. So it brought me into the library in the university, and I started looking for evidence. I started looking for journals. I started looking for articles that could about speed, power, and I found Fred Wilt, modern athlete and coach. Okay. It was an Australian publication, but it was with an applied coach, and it was taking all what was being done in Eastern Europe, the kind of science side, and applying it into how you condition yourself to be better for the sport or the activity you want to be. So that started my journey, which I haven't given up on how you can become a better performer in a way that's more scientific but applied, and that's very important. So I think my journey started then about 19 years of age. How can I get to the Olympics in 1980? Because you know, back then, and we could see it, and I could see it, the one fast track route was by taking drugs, and I didn't do that, never wanted to, because where I came from in Kappa White, I could always remember my father, who was a very straightforward man. He was very honest, and I was a bit of a pup on the hurling field. You know, I prefer boxing than hurling, literally. So I used to always get involved in a scrap and a fight on the field. I'd be sent off, and I'd be there on the side complaining, and he tapped me on the shoulder at an under-15 game once, and he said, "Now, listen," he says, "you have to stick by the rules. If you don't stick by the rules, you know, you get a bad name, and you won't go anyplace, really." So it always rang in my ear, and sticking by the rules was the first and most fundamental principle. What are the rules of engagement here? What are the rules in sport? And here are the rules, and this is why, again, and we won't dwell on it that much, but this is why shortcuts, drug taking, doping, and that doesn't stick by the rules.
Well, it's an interesting topic you're bringing up here, because obviously there's been lots of talk of drug taking in many sports, and I think now with WADA, the documentary Icarus, all these things which come out, Lance Armstrong and stuff, we're hoping that he's going to get stamped out of the game, stamped out of sport full stop. But tell us a few stories what you saw in America, because it is interesting. I think people don't get to hear this side enough. You know, the talk of Ben Johnson, the talk of, you know, all them American greats. Was it everywhere back in the day?
Oh, I think so. I think we'd be naive to think that it wasn't. And I mean, look, in the little country I'm from and Europe, you know, there is a bit of, I think, revisionism going on. And I just don't like revisionism in the sense of saying that, look, this never happened here or there or whatever. Drugs have always been in sport, way back to the, you know, in the 1800s. You know, strychnine, arsenic was taken to build, to allow athletes to endure races. But when you think then of where the 70s and 80s were, you know, we look to the Eastern Bloc and we say, well, their programs were fueled by pharmacology. And yeah, they probably were. It was systematic. It was a system. But that didn't mean that the Western countries weren't dabbling in drug taking. Yes, I'm sure they were. And I saw athletes on one particular occasion at an athletic event. I'm putting my pole down on my bag, I'm looking at the bag of the other athlete beside me, and there are syringes in it. Now, that's the environment in which we competed back then. And I understood very early on that, well, because I'm not on that stuff, I won't be able to have the power and speed of takeoff. So I'm just going to be a recreational athlete. But I would love to know how much we can actually push ourselves and how much we can reach our potential without having to resort to that. So that was my ultimate interest and drive in terms of following on what I did subsequently, which was exercise physiology, as you mentioned, and then biomechanics of sport, and that study, which I keep continuing on to this day.
Yeah, I think obviously there's shortcuts, but there's ways, there's applied ways, there's good nutrition, there's good movement mechanics, there's proper strength and conditioning, there's understanding sports science, which can actually improve you anyway. You know, even talk about technology, the different footwear, you know, understanding about climate control. There are ways of recovery processes, so there's lots of ways where you can improve yourself, but I don't think you'll ever be able to shortcut as much as taking drugs. It has to be stamped out. That's my final word on it.
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. I would agree 100%. We have to do everything we can to ensure that sport all round is clean. But we'd be naive to think that we can go on crusades to do that. The reality is, and I've always felt that there's a far better way than the policing that's going on. Imagine a scenario where every athlete competing, say, in the Olympics, had to prove that they were drug-free. You know, you'd say, well, okay, well, how would we do that? How would you prove that? Well, it's really easy. A urine or a blood sample every 6 weeks will be able to detect and monitor. Yeah. After all, a lot of my athletes that coached and are still involved in coaching, a blood sample is taken frequently just to monitor the health status. How is the system? Is the system healthy? Is anything happening? Now, that blood sample can easily be used and banked or whatever and become part of the profile on a passport, a blood passport, which shows and proves that one is clean. Now, what will that take? Yes, resources. But the science, the medical science, the sports medicine has moved on so much that that's infinitely doable. Yes, it is costly, but it is, if we're really committed to actually ensuring that athletes are clean, why not have some such system in place? And if athletes don't buy into it, well, now this is where it becomes ethically, and a lot of ethics in this, but there are ways of doing it to show that sport is clean. And yeah, we should be working more vigorously at putting systems in as opposed to waiting to catch somebody on a random drug test.
Yeah, I think all them things are important. I'm sure people in WADA and other institutes are trying to solve that problem. And I just think about my children and, you know, the thought of, you know, my little lads trying to compete against people who are taking drugs. It creates an unfair system. And ultimately, the people who are taking the drugs can really damage themselves internally and mentally as well. So we'll leave it on that. So once you finished in the athletic world, you actually went back to Ireland and you started to work in the GAA, which again was your original passion. So and you had some great success. You was in the All-Ireland Hurling Championship squad of 1991. So is that right? Is that something which you're proud of?
Yeah, it's great because I suppose, you know, I was involved with the tip hurlers, but other teams as well in Gaelic and that. And the one thing that I think stands out with Gaelic guys is, remember, they're still not professional. They're still amateur, and they commit themselves, and it's deep rooted into the community and the village and the town and the club. And I had the privilege of being involved with an All-Ireland winning team, and a lot of the guys. And here, an interesting fact, very simple on that, is we played in an All-Ireland with 56 training sessions in the year leading up to it. And every other team had at least double, if not triple that, under their belts. So back then it was a kind of an application of science in one way to say that, you know, less is actually more. Because even back then, players would have been doing probably too much work. Now, I know there's a bit of a paradox in this, but yet it illustrated the seriousness, the commitment, and dare I say, the type of commitment to being doing everything you can. Even though this is an amateur sport, they were still trying to work like pros while holding a job down, committing themselves to training daily, etc. So it was a great time, but it was a time as well where I suppose hurling was done without the aid of technology. And so nowadays it's a completely different game, because not only is technology, but all the items you mentioned, you know, we can improve so much by being creative and embracing and not being locked in old-fashioned methods either.
Very interesting. And which team was it you won with?
Tipperary.
Tipperary,
yeah, my own
hometown. So that's a
county.
double brilliant. Yeah, well,
Yeah,
congratulations to
thank you,
that.
man.
Some
Thank
great
you,
memories
thank
back
you very
then.
much, yeah.
And then from GAA, you actually moved over to Irish rugby, and you was there for a fair while, or was it a slightly different journey?
Yeah, well, it was in the early 90s as well. I went with a great guy, Stephen Aboud. He was one of the very first guys. Now, if you talk about academies, and I know every football team here has an academy, but Stephen created the very first academy in rugby, literally, in the world.
Okay.
And that was back in '92. And he was very insightful. He wanted to say, his whole philosophy was, look, let's get players earlier. Let's work with them as individuals and develop their skills, develop them physically, etc. So I joined that in and about 94, 95. I went with the Leinster Rugby. I was the fitness coach, fitness advisor with Leinster Rugby there in the mid-90s. But I worked with Stephen in the academy. And so that journey through the academy, I kept going until I retired as the director of fitness with the IRFU in 2010. So I had over a 15-year period working solidly, 16-year period.
Well, let's just talk about that period and some of the successes you had. I think you won the Triple Crown, you won the Grand Slam, you won the Six Nations. That must be an amazing time. And also seeing the development over 10 years, how the training probably adapted year in, year out, year in, year out.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, I was very lucky to be involved, because remember, rugby went professional in '95, but in Ireland it really didn't until '99, 5 years later. You might pay a player, and players were being paid financially, but that doesn't mean that they're professional. So there was a whole culture that needed changing, and systems that needed to be put into place. So 4 provinces in Ireland, but the provincial players, who are the national players, were also playing with clubs. So there was an awful lot of organisation in terms of the system that had to be done in the early years. And Stephen had been putting the groundwork in with that. So it took probably, I always remember speaking with the manager of the Irish team in around 2000, 2001, and he's saying, look, how long will it take for us to, really compete at the top end in the world?
What was his name?
Donald Lenihan.
Okay.
And we spoke about, how long will it take to develop the player to be at the cutting edge, to be as good as they can do, and we as a country to compete against the best in the world.
Yeah.
And the calculations made it about 8 years.
Wow.
So he said, what? He nearly fell off the chair and said, Liam, you're joking me if this is how long it takes. Well, if you start and you trace the development of a young player, and you can get that player at 16, 15, 16, and you add 8 years, it's about now, previously as well, you had the Bali long-term athlete development plan, so 10 years, it's a 10-year rule in that. Now we know that that's not quite what it takes. But certainly in the development of a young athlete, it takes time. Yeah. And my message was, hey, don't be expecting next year that we'll just beat England, France, Scotland, Wales, and win not only the Triple Crown, but the Championship or the Grand Slam. Yeah. It only took us 2 years to win the Triple Crown, and that was the first time since 1985 that we'd won it.
Wow.
So it was a good 15 years of a gap between winning. We won 2000, I think. 15-year gap since the last one. So you need little bits of success to confirm and affirm.
And then just keep that
going. And you keep going, and patience is one of the key principles in athlete development, as you well know.
Excellent. And we've gone out of the time in the sense of we jumped spots there because we wanted to talk about football more, and obviously my podcast has been more about football, and now I'm going to talking to the multidisciplinary team We're here at Hotel Football in Manchester, and I want to say thank you for them for allowing us to use their fantastic facility here. And the backdrop is obviously Old Trafford, where I was lucky enough to be a player. And we had some great times in the period I was here, from 1993, signing as a young apprentice, not really knowing where life would lead, and making my Premiership debut in 1996, and ultimately playing more for the first team, playing in European games on this very pitch against Marseille and Monaco, and the quarterfinals of the Champions League, and being a part of that squad, which was amazing. The class of '92, Eric Cantona, Roy Keane, you know how lucky was I? And it ultimately ended up, we won the treble in 1999. And I just want you to tell us your story regarding the football teams you worked with before we get to the crunch of that final in 1999 against Barcelona.
Well, I think after the Atlanta Olympics in '96, I was the exercise physiologist to the Irish Olympic team. And I was based in the Blackrock Clinic in Dublin. It's a clinic hospital, medical hospital, and that's where we did all the exercise physiology, all the support for the 149 athletes that went to the Olympics.
Wow.
So I was getting a little bit itchy because sport was my big area of interest. So I was being kind of pulled into more clinical physiology as opposed to performance and sport. So I met a guy called Albert Goubet. You probably won't know him, you won't know him. But he came along, and after many meetings and that, he persuaded me to come over here to Manchester.
Okay.
So I wound up, well, it's Cheshire really, in Wimslow.
Right.
I think it's a bit of a posh town in Wimslow, but he was building sport, performance, health and fitness, and rehabilitation centres.
Okay.
So the first one that I came over to help him was in Hanworth, just outside Wimslow. So I stayed here for a number of years and based myself here. And pretty soon, Andy Clark, who was with Gerard Houllier in Liverpool, Mark Leather, the physio in Liverpool, got to know, I had known Andy, and Andy came to work within the same project. So we in and out of Liverpool every now and again. And Mr. Goubet himself was a big Man City supporter.
Okay.
So there was a lot of connection with football.
Yeah.
So at that stage, I suppose, as you would recall, the science in football wasn't as big as it is now.
That's very interesting. When I first got to Man United, there was no peripheral staff. You had maybe the coaches, you had a doctor, a physiotherapist and a masseur, but there was no sports science, no nutrition really, no strength and conditioning. So like you're saying, this sport, which is a multi-million-pound sport even back then, didn't have the provision it needed.
Yeah, and I always remember Andy Clark, who's rugby league, and himself and Phil, his brother Phil Clark. Phil was a great rugby league player, but Andy started in that, but football was his real interest as well. Remember we going down to the club in Liverpool, and there was a VO2 max new system there in order to measure oxygen uptake. And as I had been in the world of exercise physiology, this was very straightforward to me, but nobody really knew how to operate it. So we did a little bit of tutoring and that on it, and Andy oversaw the players' VO2 max testing and that. But at that time as well, I was very lucky to have gotten to know Carmelo Bosco. Carmelo was an exercise physiologist as well that worked a lot in Italy. So Carmelo and I teamed up a lot, and I wound up going over to Italy, and that's where I went to Lazio, and we would basically put a fitness testing program in place. And I assisted with that, carrying out the tests and that, and would wind up frequently going over and back. So Manchester was a lovely base, and that's what brought me as well to Germany. It was much the same thing, but it was more of a coach support and education. Because just to go back, you will recall the great German players. Germany would keep going all day long. Their VO2 maxes were pretty impressive. Because that was part of I think their sports science side, which they were far more into, as were the Italians before, I suppose, the UK got into it. And so, if you remember the great teams of yesteryear from Germany, they were very strong players, but also had pretty good endurance capacities, because it was part of the program. But if you also remember around that stage, SAQ, speed, agility, quickness. Alan Pearson from up around Milton Mowbray.
Yeah, I know Alan very well.
You know Alan. Yeah. Alan got me involved in SAQ, and you know, the ladders, the little hurdles, which are standard still in football in particular. So I provided the science support for that and presented at workshops on that. So that we brought that to Italy and Germany as well. So it was within that context of education and coach education that I wound up with the coaches in Bayern Munich.
That's really interesting, because obviously sports science was becoming massive in Europe, as we can hear and listen to, and at Manchester United ourselves we didn't have that. And the treble in 1999, Liam was working for there as a coach educator, working with the players there. I was a player at Man United, and I suppose that night you got quite an interesting story. I was there to see it and to observe it and to be a part of it, and the passion, just a brilliant night, and everybody a part of Man United understands what that was about. But for you, it's quite a different story.
Yeah, you see, I was in an airport in Germany coming back here to that night. I think Mario Basler had scored. I'm not sure when, but I was pretty happy. So I came away from watching it at the airport, and the flight was called, and I had to go to the toilet. So I'm in the toilet, very happy with myself, you know, feeling happy, you know. It's coming, there's only a few minutes left in the game. I have to get to the gate. So I get to the gate, onto the flight, and it's back to Dublin I'm going. And so I get back into Dublin fairly late, and just in time to go to bed and whatever. But I'm due up the next morning to get a flight back to Manchester, back to Wimslow, back to Hanworth. So there was work to be done here. So I get up to the airport, landed here in Manchester in the airport, a flight from Dublin in, and one of the lads from the Total Fitness back then picks me up in the car, and I'm there anyway, feeling good, you know, and I'm just about to say, well, what's the mood like in Manchester? And I look behind on the seat, and I see the back. I'm not sure how it got there or whatever, but there's something about. It looked a bigger banner headline than it should be, and there was flames, the red flames in the crowd or something, and I'm saying, oh yeah, what's the mood like in Manchester? To my friend who was picking me up.
I thought you was crazy, eh?
Yeah, and he said, oh yeah, it was great, wasn't it? And I said, you shouldn't be saying it was great, because Bayern have won. And so then the penny dropped, and I said, I don't believe it. So when I was in the Jacks, he scored 2 goals. How could you do that? And of course, it was Teddy Sheringham and Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. I mean, I think they scored the goals.
No, that's right. The current manager, Solskjaer and Sheringham.
Yeah. So I just was gobsmacked. I could not believe it. How could this happen? There was only a couple of minutes to go when I went to the toilet and had to run for the flight, and that was it. So I was a bit stunned, yeah. But look, that was lovely.
I think secretly he was happy though, and I imagine most of Ireland wanted Man United to win, apart from the Liverpool supporters. So, yeah, it's an interesting story.
Liverpool supporter. No, well, look, this was an area that I spent 2 years in, and there's everything here. I mean, this area here has all the sports you want in the world.
Well, just behind us here, you can see the Old Trafford cricket ground just to the side. I know you can see it on camera, and yeah, it's rich with the sport and history. Obviously, Manchester City, the Etihad is just 3 or 4 miles down the road towards where I live, or used to live in Ashton-under-Lyne. So there's a lot of football and sport within this area.
Yeah, and when I was here, I mean, we used to have a lot now. I don't think any of the Man United players will, but I think City were going through a very rough time in the late 90s. I don't think they were doing very well at all. But I also got involved through Mark Leder with Blackburn. Mark was with Liverpool, and then I think Blackburn and Bolton in latter years. So I've had a lot of it, and Watford as well. I've had some time there, and more recently now we've been very involved with Arsenal in the whole academy development, the performance science program that we run in Setanta College.
Yeah, so we'll just introduce that. So once you finish playing working in football, you obviously continued with your education yourself. You got a couple of PhDs, and then you decided to start a university. So introduce your university. And one thing I would like to say is, well, I went to that university myself, and that's why me and Liam have got such a good friendship. And the Setanta University now linking in with other institutes. There's a real thriving blended experience online and on campus, and it's a great experience for me, and I want to appreciate the time and effort you put into myself and the rest of your staff, so thank you. But tell us more.
Well, again, it's connected with where we've been in football as well. You see, and we go back a little bit into the early noughties. Look, Irish rugby and Irish sport had really very, very poor infrastructure in terms of, back then we used to call them fitness advisor. Sports science was taking off, but we needed to make up ground pretty rapidly in terms of the rugby development for the player and the team development and understanding that. So we had to put together our own internal program. It's still running in rugby, the Certified Conditioning Coach. World Rugby we've brought it to World Rugby, and we've reached over 55,000 coaches worldwide with the program that we originally devised and modified completely for an international audience. And it became very clear that when we were doing that for rugby, all the other sports, football, I remember Brian Kerr and Jimmy McDonald. Brian, as you may know, Brian was a great coach with St. Pat's originally, and they went on to manage Ireland. And I worked closely with them as well way back, I suppose, in the late 90s. But what happened on that was a very, very clear message that we needed to create our applied education, applied training programs to educate current and would-be fitness coaches, which subsequently became our strength and conditioning coaches, but also sports scientists who lacked the applied element. So out of that grew what we have now, Setanta College. And Setanta College we launched the first program in 2007. And so we've grown from being only just local and certificate based to offering degrees, and now postgraduate master's level programs. So that focus was, and that product was born out of the need to have applied program content, not just only sports science, because that lacks the applied practical element, to be more applied. So we've developed a range of programs since then, and like your good self, you know, you've been over to Tipperary, you've enjoyed Tipperary and that performance science program. The masters that you'd have completed, we've advanced it on to being a performance science, where we embrace now technology in a huge way, where we embrace methodology, but we still ground the coach or the therapist or the individual doing it with the basic principles, which you and I have been discussing every now and again. We always come back to it, that there's basic fundamentals that underpin development no matter what sport you're involved in.
Yeah, exactly. We've talked a lot about, you know, the arts and the craft of being a coach, and, you know, getting the best out of your players and how that conversation goes and how you inspire. But if that's not built upon a foundation of science, you know, you can get things which don't quite work right. And also, if it's only based on science, you know, you got to get in the art and the craft of the coach's eye. And, you know, some people have that intuitively, some people need to learn it over time. And we're big believers of bringing them two things together, which is the perfect crossroads of what can make an applied coach really ready to work in the working environment. So it's something we spoke about a lot, and it's something with coaches you're developing, some courses I'm developing. It's something really, I think now, it's a great time for young students to get the best of experienced people like ourselves, but ultimately can help them. Like, if they do get an opportunity in the workforce, in a sporting environment, they can, you know, land and be running on their feet, and they don't got years and years of making mistakes.
Yeah, and you know, a real interesting thing, and it's I think for where you are in that, as an ex-player, as somebody who's done that, been there, done that, to come back then into education and learning to enhance your skills and the insight, to get more insight and to get up to date with science and what it has to offer is a great pathway. I mean, for you, and I know we've been through it, and I've had the pleasure of being through it with your good self and others and your colleagues as well. So when we look at the student coming through, we see the student as somebody who's not just a young student coming out of, let's say, secondary education. It's the mature athlete, and I think there's a huge opportunity there for sports participants while they're playing and playing their sport, regardless of what level, to study and to be involved in that, because we can do that now remotely. We can do that in a blended way. You don't have to be sitting in the classroom every day. And that's why for an academy player or somebody who's a professional sport, and we have a lot of them coming through from rugby who accept that, look, this could be very attritional. I mightn't be around for too many years because it's just a very physical game. Yeah. And what am I going to do afterwards? Well, to move into coaching, to move into whatever aspect of coaching, because there's so many areas. Continued education is a great way of being ready then when you decide to leave or step out.
Exactly, and that mindset, that thought process of how you're going to transition from one career to the next is massive. And there's a lot of talk about mental health in sports, how people struggle once they lose the buzzer playing the sport. But if you've prepared yourself properly, and there's opportunities, look past the end of your nose and start thinking, well, where will 2 years, 3 years, 4 years be? You can set yourself up for an easy transition. And something like your course you offer, you can do it online. Even the players in the 30s, 31, 32. By going on the course, you might extend your career by a year or two. And a year or two extra career could be multiples of millions of pounds if you're in the Premier League, or it could be a good substantial wage if you're in League One, League Two. So it's well worth doing. And also you're setting yourself up with your brain again for learning. When I first decided to do the course with you guys, I was in that middle bit where I had a bit of an academic fear. And it took me a brave step to think, can I go and do a degree? Can I go and do a master's degree? I wasn't sure. But you guys and other universities, they will help you and guide you. So please take that step. Please be brave enough, because you can do it, and believe in yourselves. You might have had good careers of players, athletes, but you can also have another career moving on, even if it's in academic or even practice-based sports as a physio, or maybe a sports scientist, a strength and conditioning coach, a psychologist. But people have got to believe themselves outside sometimes what they think they are, which was a sportsman.
Yeah, and I think we've been negligent when we talk about, as we have, and a lot of people are familiar with long-term athlete development and the pathway of development. One of the most neglected parts of the pathway is the end stage, the stage where you retire and where suddenly the day comes along. I love that interview between Donncha O'Callaghan and Roy Keane recently, because Donncha has retired at 42 from rugby as a professional. Wow. So he was playing into his 40s. Now he's come from a very well thought out, which we'd like to think, early development right through to his 40s to play that really big bruising game. But suddenly he finishes, and what is he going to do? Now we'd like to say, forget about what sport that is. There's a responsibility on the sport and on those who are involved in it, not just to prepare these players for the next weekend game or the upcoming championship or whatever. There's a responsibility to look at the longevity of the individual. Exactly, yeah. And also to help them decide, look, you may be in your late 20s now and 30s. What are you going to do? Ideally, you might have started earlier in education and in that friendly environment of blended learning which we provide. But there's many, many different options on that out there through many different universities. And so that's one thing that I would encourage, I suppose, through speaking with administrators or sport associations. Look at that end of the pathway, and what are you doing to prepare players for that day that they will retire from being the pro that they have been for 10 years.
It's a really interesting point. In football, they've got the PFA. In Irish rugby, there's probably institutes and unions to look to. But if you want to get in touch with the Setanta College, what have you got? The website? Have you got?
Yeah, the website, www.setantacollege.com, admin@setantacollege.com, email Thomas, our registrar. he'll pass anybody on to the relevant student supports. So that's at minutes@tentacollege.com. Send that email to Thomas. He's a lovely guy.
Yeah, and they're brilliant guys. And I've been through that process, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And one of the things when I was at Thurles, you actually become a part of the Patrick Harrington golf setup, didn't you? And it was great. I met him one day, and it was amazing. And he had great successes winning the Open Championship, and you was a part of him as well, eh?
Yeah, I think we're 22 years now working together. So when Padraig started as a pro back in 95, I was born in 95. I started working with Padraig. So yeah, look, that's been, I'm privileged to being able to do that, but he's probably the hardest training athlete that I've ever met, in the sense that he leave no stone unturned. But going back to your point, Mick, it's the application of science. Padraig would have always considered himself just an ordinary talent, not talented to the extent that you've got these outliers, as we all know, who are super, and he had to work. But he had this great work ethic. Now, at the age of 47, he's striking a ball as far as he's ever struck the ball before. So what we're trying to do is provide longevity so that he can continue on onto the Masters Tour, but without the normal age decline, the decrement that age brings normally. Yeah. We're trying to keep that line flat as opposed to dropping off.
But like you say, you know, speed, strength, the things you need for golf, but also cognitive awareness, working out angles, or these things can fade as time goes by, but you're helping him on all them different aspects.
Yeah, and it comes back to what we've said as well. It's to do with all the conditioning modes and methods, but nutrition and lifestyle as well. And I mean, we spoke about the importance of nutrition, sleep, etc. All of those are the daily elements that somebody like Padraig has to apply properly. But the interesting thing is as well is that, again, we go back to the basic principles. You can't get far from them, you know, and they're the fundamentals that underpin. Padraig is not doing the same work that he did 20 years ago, but in principle he's applying the same principle. You know, he's pulling back a bit more now than he used to. He's resting, he's resetting and recovering before he develops. Yeah. So you have to put in your reset and recovery before you can develop and progress.
I mean, what's brilliant about that, listening to you talk about Padraig, is it reminds me of Ronaldo. And obviously we're here at Hotel Football with Manchester United behind us, and it sounds like Padraig, like Ronaldo, has really bought into the, you know, the stakeholders in around him, the nutritionists, the psychologists, you know, the recovery protocols, you know, so all that's really, really important.
Yeah, and you know, we work with a lot of industry leading technology companies, one of which is Oracle. Now, they work with a couple of premiership teams, the boys in Oracle, and they deliver a great product, which is analysis of the individual player. And they're moving into the world of big data analysis, which is one of their main businesses in the States with the NBA and even football, the NFL. I think it's coming into football, and it will be more, I have no doubt. In other words, big data. But what's the big data analysis? That's taking you as a player, and with all the information that's available now on you as the player through technology, it's about pulling out the key factors and metrics that are important for you to help you have a greater duration, you know, to help you with longevity, but also to have you performing better based on what your needs are. So with everything that's available there in terms of technology, it's all about coming back to the basics, the individual being the first thing. In other words, what is it that Mick Clegg needs to have in his weekly routine, his daily routine, to help him be at his best? So it's individualizing and not having just that group, oh, everybody must do the same thing mentality. So this basic principles that Padraig uses, you know, players are now starting to use in a much more meaningful way.
Yeah, so the Oracle project is really quite interesting. That brings us on to maybe the very, very latest of technologies, and you know how we can help athletes, how we can help the general public, and how we can help, you know, society as a whole to really understand where we are as individuals and what's going to help us to live longer. What's not just only in the sporting sense, but in living life and having great relationships in your families and children. Regarding yourself, Liam, I've known you for a few years, and you have been suffering with cancer yourself, and I think it's quite important to discuss these things things in an open forum, like many people talk about mental health. You know, there are people who are suffering out there who end up becoming a bit insular. But like yourself, you've had chemotherapy. You know, just talk us about the issues you've been through. And I mean, you look amazingly fit today. And you know, when I saw you, I'm not seeing you now for a year or two, but I thought, wow, doesn't Liam look well?
Well, thank you, Mick. I'm delighted you think I look well, which is great. Yeah, I'm feeling good now. And yeah, look, you touch upon something that I think is we have to probably move into a lot more, the acceptance of special populations. Now, whether I like it or not, I've had cancer a number of times, and I've just finished the latest bout of chemotherapy and that, and it brings all sorts of issues. And I'm probably one of a group that's growing and growing and growing. Your dad is in the same boat.
Yeah, my dad's had similar issues with skin cancer and the fear of it and the potential of having operations, and he's tried to go down more of a very natural sense. You know, he's caught it quite early, so he's now doing organic food. He's going to some alternative medicines. He's really trying to be more mindfulness and thinking about how to just, you know, be in a more relaxed state, because he's quite a stressful guy. And I think again that's lifestyle, culture, and depending how deep these cancers are. My auntie Jacqueline, great lady, she's had half of her internal organs chopped out because she had a really aggressive cancer. But yourself, and we're just talking about, you know, we're all individuals, and it's difficult stages. A lot of people are suffering for this, and you going through this. You know, how is it? What advice would you give for people who are going through these issues? And
well, you know, the unfortunate reality is that more and more are likely to be diagnosed with some form of illness and disease, be it cancer or whatever. And in other words, we're all hopefully going to live longer as well, and hopefully medicine will keep us alive. But underpinning that is the need for quality and of life, and the quality of life, and in particular where I've come from, the role of your lifestyle and exercise. Okay, we can't do much about what we have been doing or what I used to do, and maybe what are the factors associated with the onset of cancer or whatever. But certainly for those who've had it, I'm sure we could do an awful lot more in terms of better management, so that outcomes are better in terms of recovery and response. The medical profession and medical research is doing phenomenal stuff in terms of the medical care and the treatment of it. And I've no doubt in a few years there's going to be so much of a different approach in terms of treating and managing. But I think we have a great opportunity as well as cancer, I suppose, patients, to see, and the world of, I suppose, the science of, and what does lifestyle and daily life routine and the role of exercise. And again, we must be very careful that, because everybody is an individual, and I've no doubt that the principles might be similar in terms of how we train athletes. You know, principle of individuality. You've got to treat the individual uniquely in this. But I've no doubt that exercise, nutrition, general lifestyle, anything we can do to enhance a routine of better sleep quality. So all of those that we talk about in athletic terms for developing our athletes, we can shift on to looking at it for the patient who has had the disease. Now look, we know that there are other diseases as well. There's the osteoporotic, there's the Alzheimer's, there's the dementia. So we've an awful lot more to figure out the role of exercise. Now we know the role of exercise is very, very important, critical in the reducing the risk of the onset of osteoporosis. But in terms of those other age-related diseases as well, the role of exercise, diet, lifestyle. So we have a huge amount to learn in that. And again, in our programs, we have, for example, a special populations module, and we look at biomedical aspects from a point of view of those who are competitive, who might have diabetes, for example, which is growing, and type 2 diabetes is growing. In
Yeah,
society.
I was just going to say type 2 diabetes, obesity, these chronic illnesses, which are really solvable. You know, they're lifestyle factors. The other things, you know, it's still can we be in control of certain maybe genetic factors, but regarding the ones we are in control of, you know, I was lucky enough to go speak at Christie's Hospital in Manchester. I spoke to the surgeons there, the doctors, the nurses, the IT staff, and I was speaking to them about their own care. You know, they're giving care to all the ill children and the very emotional parents, and you know, it's very, very difficult, and they're not looking after themselves to give the best practice. And you've seen this, and they're probably amazing practitioners, you know, but you've got to, I think as a society, we all need to look after ourselves, therefore we can give better service and even be more efficient at work. So what you're saying is quite right. There's a lot of issues out there, but maybe through courses in the future, through Setanta, through all other organisations, about what should nutrition be, what is good nutrition, what is good sort of physical practice, to maybe, you know, tamper down the amount what is happening, because it's widespread.
Yeah, you know, yesterday I was in for my scan, which is standard stuff in the clinic in Dublin yesterday, and I saw this great notice, which is they have a staff walk for half an hour at lunchtime, which is a small example of a workforce or a community doing something positive. In other words, getting exercise in, getting out of the work environment. Operation Transformation is an amazing scheme in Ireland. It's a program where communities are coming together to walk, jog. Nice. It's just being active together. And you see all these initiatives going on, and these are very, very important. But what we do need in tandem with that are well-informed individuals, not just the medics, not just the clinical people, because they have a lot on their plates with managing the treatments and programs. But we need far more who are, how would I say, more coaches in lifestyle to embrace what are good, sensible lifestyle principles. And we're not, I suppose, we're not anywhere near having that in our communities compared to what we might have in sport. You know, we're very structured in sport. You'll have all your support staff here. You know, it's moved on hugely in the last decade, and it will continue to evolve. Well, we need that kind of parallel in society as well to help people who are not really into sport competitively to embrace good lifestyle principles. And we need well-educated people to be the conveyors of that, and then to empower the individuals to be able to do that themselves.
That's a really interesting point. I'm sure with your university and projects I've got around myself, these might be courses what actually come up in the future, where maybe practitioners or even people who've suffered illnesses, you know, this could be something which you could add on to your continuous personal learning and development. You know, it'll be great to learn more about yourself to best prepare for your future.
Yeah, and I suppose we're all on a journey. I mean, I hope that in 20, 30 years when we do another, that you'll be still on a journey of continual development. We call it CPD, continual professional development. It doesn't have to be professional. It's continued education and personal.
Continued personal development, yeah.
And I think that's hugely important.
Well, Liam, we've covered very many bases there, you know, from being brought up in Kappa White down in Tipperary, all the way around to cancer and football, Bayern Munich, 1999, Setanta University, helping me with my career in education. And I just want to say thank you for coming over to Manchester. I wish you all the very best, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Mick. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the next one we have.
Brilliant.